I have to say, right, you know, for many years it was a hatred, Daphne, that kept me going, really. You know, I'd sit in that bed and I would think of all ways that I was going to take the screws apart, limb from limb, you know, because they was torturing the life out of me at that time.
Today is a dramatic day. And the reason it's a dramatic day, I've got a very dramatic guest, Stephen Gillen. This man has quite a story. It's not a normal story. And the story has to be told in 3 sections: past, present and future. My name is Daphne Taducci. I'm bringing you the epic story of Stephen Gillen.
Thanks for having me, Daphne. I'm expecting a very, very deep, very exclusive interview today. We're going to go into content that has never before been put out there.
Let's get down to it. People know you for your big personality, but also for some of the things in life that people would put under the umbrella as being a gangster or crime boss. So how do you carry that name these days?
I was certainly all of them things at one time in my journey, it has to be said. I mean, you know, there are many things that have been put out in the press and all this, but I think it's from the life that I lived, you know, going to prison the first time at 14 to going all the way through to being a Category A prisoner, 3 trials at the Old Bailey, even being released as a Category A. It's fair to say that someone who lives a life like that has done serious things.
How do you think gangsters are made? Do you think that people are born with kind of the bad boy gene, or do you think people, places and conditions have some part to play in that? What is your take on that, Stephen?
I've certainly seen the good, the bad and the ugly, Daphne, as I call it, you know, and there are that fraction of people, for whatever reason, mental illness or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's something different about them, you know, the sociopaths, whatever you want to call it, right? You know, but generally, you know, with villains, you know, and I've been around the most notorious, you know, I was in special units. I was classed as one of the UK's most disruptive, violent prisoners myself on that sentence. Generally, 90% of prisoners, people involved in this life, are at different levels of kind of violence or seriousness, but behind that, there's still people.
So am I understanding you that you think that there's a combination of things that lead people into that life?
There's a lot of grooming into that life. I was certainly groomed into that life. You know, other people are more susceptible to that than others. You know, I mean, I was brought up as a child without family, really, without father, certainly, in the middle of a war zone. So that was the formative years, you know. And then the migration, of course, it went from petty crime into very serious crime, into where I ended up, right, involved in very, very heavy organised crime over a long period of time. Of course, there's only a couple of endings for that, Daphne, and they're all bad. But you know, if I was born into another family, completely another place, another time, different parents, you know, with different cultural, environmental elements around me for my growth, would I have been different? I believe absolutely.
When you were sitting in prison and you were having a very dark moment, did you ever feel, apart from the other gang members, did you ever feel excluded from the tribe, or did you feel a part of that? What did you identify with in prison? Who did you identify with?
You have to understand, Daphne, that crime, serious crime, them kind of affiliations, a very treacherous life. you know, it's like anything. You know, there are levels as well. There are levels of crime, levels of experience, levels of age, levels of talent, if you want to call it that. But it is a treacherous life. So there are affiliations, and of course there are people you get very close to when you migrate through a life like that, and you get very bound with the guys, you know. I mean, you're all in, you're outlaws, if you want to call it that, is a good word, because I used to feel like that apart from society. So we was this kind of, you'd have what was a surrogate family, really. But of course, it's devil may care in many ways. It's a very selfish life. It's a very evil life, you know, and there are bad endings to it. I'm not saying all the people in that life are bad. There's some very talented, very good people in that life as well. But they get groomed, they get caught into it, they get locked into that life too, and they are propelled through it in the same way. But the endings and the results are the same for everyone.
I'm going to ask you a tough question. What did it actually feel like being locked up in the cages? How did that feel to you?
It's desperate. It's soul destroying. You know, you have to imagine being in the darkest place that you could be of your soul, of your physicality, you know, being stripped from absolutely everything, not even having a future, you know, being really bound to that, you know, having to deal with a lot of violence. You know, I had a lot of trouble there with the officers, the screws. We was fighting all the time, and yeah, you know, there'd be other inmates, and we had, you know, there was a lot of gang stuff was going on as well, so you'd have that in there, you know, a lot of violence, and to lose yourself completely like that takes you down to the basis kind of human survival mode. It's a very, very, very dark, very painful, very, very strange place to be at, and to be there for so long is really something else.
That must have taken a lot of emotional strength. Where do you think you pulled your strength from at that time?
I have to say, right, you know, for many years it was a hatred, Daphne, that kept me going, really. You know, I'd sit in that bed and I would think of all ways that I was going to take the screws apart, limb from limb, you know, because they was torturing the life out of me at that time, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, right? You know, there was a real running battle. You know, I had 25 moves around the system then. You know, a lot of violence in and out of the box, a lot of stuff happening, you know. So for me, I coped very badly with it. It's the truth. I mean, you would, right? All them years, 12 years I'd done, right? So high security prisoner. So that was the truth, you know. I realise that now. So my answer to that was rebellion, to try and keep just that last sacred part of me that I thought that I had left. Or, you know, there was times I never thought I was going to get out of there. I never thought I'd get out of there.
What does torture look like in a prison to you?
You know, there are many forms of torture. Physical torture can be the least of it, Daphne, really. When you're talking about the mental, spiritual, emotional things, and all of it at the same time, you know, you're into a different game, really. You know, the screws where there was that real hatred and that running battle, they'd do all kinds of things. They'd spit in our food, they'd mess around with our letters, our visits. You know, I was on the Northern Circuit for 5 years, just up the north. I mean, I'm from London, all my people was in London. But they do that on purpose, to wear you down and break you.
So, Stephen Gillen, did they break you?
Daphne, look, you know, people, they talk about this, right? And I say, in there, that place, it has no soul, it has no heart. And I know they broke a lot bigger, stronger, tougher, if you want to call it, than me. That's the truth. And I see them do that on a regular basis. For me, there was just something in me that I just wouldn't give up. I would have rather have died for that last piece of me that I was keeping. How I got through it, I really don't know. But of course, I got through it. I'm here today. So, you know, the tough, all of this stuff, that's just the physicality. When you get into emotional toughness, spiritual toughness, mental toughness, this is a different world of toughness. That's what that taught me. You know, the physicality of it, big and strong. That's only one part of it, really. And I think that's one of the weaker parts of human strength. You know, to be honest with you, that's what I learned. Because I see big men in there, big, strong and all that. I see the most skinniest little, most dangerous come and just dust them. That's just one strength.
So what I hear from you is that although you were locked up for a long time in very dark places, what I'm hearing that was a deep education, mind, body, heart and soul for you. What's your reaction to that?
Now with hindsight, absolutely. I mean, when you're going through that, it is a very desperate thing. Like I say, you know, the twilight zone doesn't even come close to it. You're at your most basest human place, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, where you're clinging on to sanity in many ways. Now that reveals some real stuff in a human being, you know, and anyone who's been in them kind of situations for many years and had to deal with them kind of challenges, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
So what did you learn about yourself and from that experience?
I learned that I'm human. You know, before that, you know, we had a kind of a part of us where we thought we was invincible. It's never going to happen to us, right? But of course, life, you know, it teaches us different lessons. That, you know, the opposite is true, that we are human, but we have different gifts. And, you know, there's a lot of learning involved in this. Because the truth is, before Daphne, I was still on a journey to know myself. But that was a real baptism of fire, not just in knowing myself on the outer level, but with such a unfathomable depth that this is a different level of it.
Did you like what you found in yourself?
At that time, I didn't. You know, I really didn't love myself. I thought it was very ugly. I knew I was in a lot of trouble. I was in a lot of pain. I was carrying a lot of trauma. I was dealing with a lot of issues. I didn't really understand myself. You know, I knew I'd been groomed. I'd been swept along, really, in doing actions and playing a part that really was never me. Because I didn't actually know myself. I just had to respond. I had to act.
So how does a nice guy like you, full of heart and soul, end up in a place like that? Can you tell me a bit about the past?
I was born here in England. I was taken over to Belfast as a baby, 6 months old. I don't remember it. Right in the middle of the war over there, right? So this was, early 70s. Right in the middle of the bombs, the guerrilla war there. So I stayed there till I was 9. I see a lot of trauma over there. I see people killed in front of me. I had to watch that, and a lot of violence. It was very normal for me to have armoured cars turn up, loads of soldiers jump out with rifles and shoot it out with the flats all night. This kind of thing, a riot. This was everyday normal checkpoints, and there was always an air of you had to be careful of what you said, where you went, there was always something. Even though I was a child, it seemed normal to me. But even then, there was something. That was the start of it for me. I lost my surrogate mother there, Madge. When I was at 9, I was a young kid with the case on the boat going to a foreign place, with nothing and no one, and that's when I come to England and in London, and that was the start of that journey.
So what was it like being 5 years old in Northern Ireland?
There was magical times there. Right, it's like in my book, that's the monkey puzzle tree. that's optioned now to be a major film. There's a lot of the story in there. I mentioned that because that was in the backyard, the monkey puzzle tree. And there was a lot of, I was told that held all the secrets of the land and it could hear your thoughts. I mean, there were magical moments, but there were tough moments too. There was a lot of hardships over there then in them days.
And how did you cope without your mum and dad?
This stuff is very tough, and it plays itself out as we go through life, that's for sure. And then, of course, I lost my surrogate mother, who was, the world to me. She was such a kind soul, really. Like a saint, I kid you not. I don't just say that because she was my surrogate mother. She was loved by everyone, So this was a wonderful, time as well. Losing her to cancer was turned everything upside down, for me, And I was 9. In many ways, I mean, that was the start of it for me, of everything going wrong, the trouble.
Do you think, looking back, that if you had stayed in Ireland, do you think that you wouldn't have got into trouble?
I've often thought about this, and all I can say is years later, when I was away with a lot of really high-profile guys who was in British prisons, from the old days then of what was going on there with all the trouble, in the guerrilla war. I mean, they say to me, Stephen, you'd be dead now. You'd be dead now. In many ways, you're lucky that there was so many people, You wouldn't be here now, The way that you are, rightly or wrongly, just the way that you are and where you was, the environment of what you had to grow up in there. It's very likely that you wouldn't have lasted long. You wouldn't be here now.
I believe you had a very close call when you were very young and there was a soldier or a young man shot in front of you. Could you tell us about that?
It was a riot and it flared really, really quickly, as they do, Daphne. And there was a young lad, and now looking back, I don't have been more than 20 or whatever. Balaclava, there was a lot of gunfire from the flats and the RUC and the army and all this stuff, trading fire, and he was shot in front of me. I was, terrified behind a hedge. It was about 6, 7 there now at bush, and I had to stay there for 20 minutes while he died. He was calling for his mother. That was terrible for me. I wasn't anything like that, and absolutely cried my eyes out with that, as you would as a child. And of course, I couldn't move in that road because it was so dangerous. Should have been killed. But some people, they managed to get a break in the fire and they pulled him away from that. I always wondered, what happened to him. But I know, and I feel that he didn't come back from that.
So when you were so small like that, did you understand? Did you have a perception of whether he was a goodie or a baddie?
The way it was then, with all the history, rightly or wrongly, it wasn't the police and everyone was bad, but there wasn't someone to be trusted. There was a lot of bad stuff that was going on there. So it was hard for me to understand, but if I was to pick anyone, it would have been to pick him who died in front of me more than the authorities. It's just the way the place was at the time, Daphne.
So would you say that you were working on your instincts?
That's how the place was at that time.
How you tell your stories, you're very clear-minded, Stephen Gillen, very. Were you always clear-minded?
I think I was always forceful and clear-minded in what I wanted to do, certainly. But I had to become the person I am today, Daphne. And there's another learning there for me. Is it's not even that we fall down or there's challenges, adversity along the way. It's what we become is really what it's about.
So looking back into your past, I've got 3 questions for you. What was the worst bit about the past? The best bit of your past? And what could have you done better?
The worst bit was not having the support network around me, or that protection really of a good instruction and moral roadmap really got me into all sorts of troubles and traumas, and that would have been better to avoid. That was the worst part of it. The best part of it was, it's my history, you know, I still cherish it, you know, and I cherish the wonderful times. We are who we are, and this stuff forges us to be the people we become.
And what could have been better?
It's a funny question, what could have been better? I could have a list of what could have been better, but really I think if you want to narrow it down, what could have been better? The environment and the people around me to lift me in a more healthier way. This could have been better.
I know in your past you spent some time in prison with Charlie Bronson. What effect did he have on you?
There's a lot is said about Charlie. I got on really well with Charlie. You know, it's like anything. There's a lot of other sides about Charlie that people don't know. You know, they don't see the human part of him. They don't see the really good codes of conduct he has. They don't see, he's such a funny man. He's so entertaining, all right? You know, they don't see the real values. He has some really old school values around things that I certainly really, really agree with. And, you know, even now, a lot of these kind of values, you know, they're more diluted really than what I see. So we was in a lot of places together because of both our separate journeys. And so, you know, I travelled out with Charlie, and I know a different side to him. He should certainly be sent home now. I know he's due for a parole and that, and he should certainly get that. I hope they see their way clear now, you know, to do justice with Charlie.
How do you become a Category A prisoner?
The Home Office definition of a Category A prisoner is someone who's highly dangerous to the public, the police, or the security of the state, and whose escape must be made impossible. You know, if the crime is really high profile, or if you've been known for violence to escape, this kind of thing.
Is it easy to be violent?
For me, Daphne, it was. That's the truth. Although I didn't really like violence, this has to be said too, you know, and what I learned in my life is there's two kinds of violent people. Again, there's that small kind of demographic who actually thrive in it. Like they thrive in it, they buzz in it, it's like a drug to them, they relish it. But generally, some of the most violent people that I've seen, they can be violent like that in a moment when they need to be. Some of them, they don't necessarily like violence. They use violence as a tool. And if they're threatened, then they certainly use that violence quickly as a tool. I would fall under that category. I certainly didn't find it hard to turn my hand to violence, and great violence, if I needed to, within the environments, you know, and the threatening situations that, you know, I had to travel through. But I was never really, I never went out there and looked for violence, and I would look for ways not to let it get to that, because violence is always a bad thing, and especially between serious people who was violent. We all kind of knew that, look, you know, we want to do everything we can not to get to that violence, because we all know if you get to the stage where it gets violent, then it gets very bad very quickly. No one really wants that.
So in your walking life today, I've never seen you be violent. So what happened to the violence? Did it go?
I think when you see such violence, such death, and you're programmed for this such early on, it dehumanises you in some way. And when you're living a life where you have to survive like that, and you're using violence as a tool, this is why it becomes easy for you, a lot easier to do these things. But there is about that fearlessness as well. I mean, there was times that I would do things other people they wouldn't even imagine, even people who was crazy. I would do that stuff, right? And it's kind of in there in people, Daphne, right? It's like other ingredients in people. But, for us as human beings, with these character traits and ingredients, one of the jobs is for us to learn about ourselves, the good and the bad, and be able to temper that and, and really, really master ourselves, right? Again, there's a paradox here. There's so many in life. I don't like violence. Well, I've used violence, certainly, serious violence, many times when I had to or I felt threatened. But, I've learned in the human condition, even a woman whose child is threatened, is she going to use violence to defend? Of course she is. So we have to accept it's in there, right? But it's mastering ourselves, right? And sometimes there's not even a moral circumstances within this, really. So it gets very deep, this question.
Yeah, going deep with you, Stephen, is a good thing. Because I also think that there are many people out there that don't want to go deep. They don't want to look at past situations. They don't want to look at painful situations. But if they don't actually heal or transcend, transform. And I notice with you, you're masterful at transformation and transforming. So I welcome this deep and honest interview with you today, and thank you very much for your honesty and for your focus for doing that. So what I want to know now is, what did you learn about the human condition from your past? So on what I mean about that, so you're observing people and their human conditions. Yes, you're in amongst it, but you're watching everything play out. What was your biggest learnings?
People are people, they really are. By that I mean we're a real hodgepodge of ingredients. You've got your environmental issues, you've got all kinds of fears, insecurities, strengths, weaknesses. We can go on and on. So it's kind of put together like a patchwork quilt. But for me, I had to really work people out really, really quickly. It'd be do or die, or people in that life. You get a real insight, a real sharpened ability to be able to do that on a really, really, really deep, exponential level quickly, right? It's kind of another part of that survival kind of instinct, and the processor computer is really quick at that, right? But, you would know, I also know that there are certain elements in people that will be in there, right? You've got all kinds of stuff, from jealousies, from greed, all the negative stuff. So it's about protecting yourself from that and knowing that it's in there with people, really. And, if they're presented with a certain set of circumstances, then the chances are such and such may happen. It really taught me I'm very strategic in every single thing I do. Every choice, every way I look at things and all that. And in a way I had to be like that. But it's about solutions and answers and protection and positioning, and this controls and defends against a lot of bad stuff. But it also keeps together the good stuff so you can keep going forward. I hope that helps.
Well, I find your answer very intriguing, because this interview is all about what your experiences really did to change you, what those things that happened to you will transform into your present life and your future life. So I thank you for talking in that way. Today I'm talking with Stephen Gillen about his past, present and future. And for this first segment, we've gone very deeply into his past. And even perhaps Stephen doesn't realise how deep he went in his past to actually draw out his glorious future.